On Sunday afternoon at the Royal Festival Hall, the London Jewish Male Choir gives a gala concert of Jewish liturgical music, Israeli music, operatic and Russian music. The concert's primary appeal is obviously to Jewish people. Indeed, many a Gentile, I fancy, will have little idea what Jewish liturgical music sounds like, until now at any rate, let alone any knowledge at all of the art of its main exponent, the cantor. So let's do something to fill the gap, with the help of the choir's conductor, Emanuel Fisher, and Moshe Korn, cantor, chorister, and soloist on Sunday, and indeed also on that record. They're talking to Michael Oliver.
I think we must begin, Mr. Korn, on a program of this nature by asking, what is a cantor?
This is a leader in the synagogue who takes the service. He leads the congregation in singing.
His function is purely to lead the music in the service.
To lead the music in the synagogue, or at services sometimes outside the synagogue. And he is leading the choir, the congregation, and so on.
Does he have to go through much special training?
Yes, he has to have certain qualifications, which, first of all, which I just mentioned, he must have a nice, loud and sweet voice. He should be pleasant to the congregations. Second, he must be able to speak the Hebrew language and read all the prayers and know all the prayers and their meanings.
He has to memorize them?
No, he has got a prayer book, but he has to know the meaning of the prayers. And when he sings them, the prayers, they must mean to himself and to the congregation, as if they understand word by word, like a lecture in singing. Don't forget, because nearly 3,000 years ago, when the Bible was beginning to be read to the people in Israel, so they decided the Bible to read with melodies, which the people understand much better, as if just reading straightforward with a reading voice. A singing voice is more acceptable to the congregation. Yes. And that's how it started. And after the Jews were exiled from the land, from Israel, then when the congregation were formed, then each congregation, they had to decide who is going to make sure the prayers are not forgotten and to take over from the temple.
Mr. Fisher, how old is the music that we're talking about?
The mood of the music dates back a long, long way, back to temple times. But compositions have, of course, been forthcoming for many, many years since then, in wherever the Jews have settled. I mean, we see many so-called Jewish liturgical compositions which are German. I mean, they could be quite easily non-Jewish Christian German hymns. So it varies. But there are certain Jewish tunes which date right back from Bible days, which we retained. Principally, actually, in the Sabbath service, when we chant the Bible, the portion of the Bible for the week, this special chant is the oldest Jewish music there is.
Has that been modernized or developed at all?
Not at all, no. It's absolutely as it was originally.
And how much of this original music is there? Is it a very large repertoire?
No, it's very small. It's not really a repertoire at all. It's, how can I explain this? There is a shorthand in the actual text of the Bible, not the scroll that we hold up, but in the printed version in books. Under each word of the Bible there's a little shorthand symbol that represents a tune, very small tune. So it's these tunes which are ancient, but there's no real repertoire as such.
Does the tradition vary very much from one part of the world to another? You went to a synagogue in, shall we say, Spain or Norway or somewhere. Would you recognize the music as being very similar to what you sing?
Not really. Well, there is a division. The Jews are divided into two sections. The Ashkenazim, which are the German-based Jews that came from Germany. Most of the Jews settled few hundred years ago in Germany. I shouldn't say most of the Jews, but a large proportion did. And they have given rise to the Jews in Russia, Poland, etc., in England. Their mode of prayer is quite different from the Jews in the hotter parts of the world, the ones we call the Sephardim, the Spanish. Their music and language is quite different.
Mr. Korn, the music is exclusively for male voices, I understand.
It should be. I understand there are some mixed choirs all over the world. But can I just add a word to Mr. Fisher? You see, there were tradition from the temple times, certain tunes, which they might be even the same as we sing today, some of them. But as there was no written script at the time, so many were lost. Now, we were dispersed in many countries, and from each country we accepted some flavor in our compositions, in the Jewish music. That's why we have got some East European tunes, some West European tunes, and some Spanish, which are different a little bit. You understand? So that's why we have got now in Germany, it has been accepted what you just mentioned, choirs and canto compositions. That was the German style. In East Europe, it was different. There was a cantor, and he was the main attraction, and the choir, a small choir, only used to give him background music.
Are instruments admitted into the synagogue service?
Not normally, no. It depends on whether you're talking about Orthodox or Liberal or Reformed synagogue service.
The Bible speaks of a fair number of musical instruments.
Yes, this was during the temple time. They used to have an orchestra in the temple. The Levites, which were a section of the community, they used to have the huge choirs and conductors, and they used to sing the great hymns, the Psalms, from King David and other who composed the Psalms. And some Psalms even begin with the Psalm of David to the chief musician.
Yes.
But why has this instrumental tradition died out?
Because of the destruction of the temple. That's why we are not allowed any orchestra in the synagogue.
Ah, I see.
That is the express reason for it.
You mentioned the influence of the music of other countries on the music of the Jews in those countries.
Yeah.
Has the reverse been true? Can you trace the influence of Jewish music on non-Jewish?
Well, I know one instance. It's a hymn that they often hear on the radio, coming from church, on the church service, which is one of our tunes. I don't know what the name of the hymn is, but the tune's da 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 dee, da 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 dee, da 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 dee 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 dee. This is a popular song of ours. It's the only instance I know where it's gone the reverse way.
What about the influence on concert hall music?
There must be a lot of influence. I know I was told that in the great synagogues in Warsaw, they used to, all the musicians from the country, they used to come to certain evenings like Kol Nidre night, that Day of Atonement.
Yes.
And they used to have a special site for very important people to listen to the musical compositions which are being played.
And you do have sacred compositions, of course, by Jews, which are in the classical repertoire, Bloch, for example.
I was wondering whether there is a distinctive influence of Jewish music on Jewish composers such as Mendelssohn or Schoenberg or someone of that kind. Can one trace the origins in their music?
Not specifically. Jewish people are, well, I, for example, feel that when I listen to Mendelssohn, there is what I call a Jewish element in it, but to actually analyze it would be difficult. There is a feeling about some of the sweet melodies which sometimes one thinks could only come from a Jew, but I may be just imagining it. I don't think that's the word.
Are contemporary composers writing for the synagogue services?
Yes, particularly in America. I don't know why in England we do write. I mean, I write too, but the publishing of Jewish music in this country is non-existent, practically non-existent. There doesn't seem to be a market for it. Our congregations are difficult. They're steeped in tradition, forgetting, of course, that tradition had to start somewhere.
There must presumably have been a change in that in Israel, I would have thought.
Mr. Korn would know about that. He lived in Israel for a time.
In Israel, I sang in a choir, in the synagogue choir, since a little boy, actually. And what I remember, we all used to sing the very, very big compositions which came from Europe. To this day, I don't think... the only thing they've done in Israel to cut the compositions short. That's the only thing they've done.
Are younger people still coming forward to be trained as cantors?
Very few, I'm afraid.
Very few,
Very
but
few indeed.
very ambitious young men.
Why is it that there are so few? Is it a very taxing training?
I don't know how to explain this. First of all, they have to be Orthodox also. And it's very hard to find young men Orthodox. You can find them, but not... They don't want to go in this profession. They rather be doctors or solicitors. You understand?
Yes.
And a young man who wants to be a cantor, if he wants it, maybe the congregation doesn't want him because he hasn't got a voice. Then you have to accept all the duties which are given to you. And it's very hard to find young men which will combine all this together.
A cantor is equivalent to a rabbi from the point of view of the duties he has to do.
Sometimes even more.
And the learning he has to absorb.
In the 19th century, one hears tales of cantors as almost operatic stars travelling from one centre to another and
Yes.
drawing enormous audiences. Does
Yes.
this still happen?
Yes, it does still happen.
Yes.
Not to the same extent, but it does happen. I mean, in London we have visiting cantors, and they do attract enormous crowds. The last festival hall concert I gave 2 years ago, we had as our star Jan Pierce, the great operatic tenor, who also doubles as a cantor on occasions, and he attracted fantastic crowds.
Where are the main centres of training for cantorial singing?
Now, in America and in Israel.
And what sort of period of training does one have to go through?
You have to have it 2 or 3 years at least, but you have to be born in it. I forgot to
Yes.
mention before. You have to be trained as an Orthodox, from an Orthodox house, from childhood. If I was singing at the age of 6 in Frankfurt am Main, I was singing in the synagogue already. When I came to Israel 2 years later, I joined the great synagogue in Tel Aviv. It was nothing new for me. And later on, when I became a young cantor, with the age of 13, so there was no problem for me. I just was a bit frightened, like everybody else. But I knew the prayers, there was nothing. And the voice, and I was lucky I had the voice, so it was no problem. But if you get somebody who had no idea, it's like somebody learning a new profession.
Yes,
If he's lucky, he learns it quick. If not, he's unlucky.
it's definitely a thing that one has to be steeped in. You can't. I've seen examples of chaps who've tried to be cantors, and they've learned all that one is supposed to learn, but they've never quite absorbed everything because it's something that you are brought up with.
The interest in the genuinely traditional, several thousand years old Jewish music, is that keeping up, or are people more concerned to hear the 19th century pieces?
I think they're divided, the congregation.
Yes.
Look, I've got my own style. I share it between East and West, you can say it. I like it with choir and cantor, and then cantor on its own with some background, choir, or sometimes when there's no choir, sing on my own.
Yes.
And this is acceptable to my congregation in where I come.
I was going to mention that the thing that is most important to stress about the art of the cantor is that he is the great improviser. This is something we haven't touched on at all. There are certain moods, vocal singing moods, melodic moods in the service, which are handed down from generation to generation, and the cantor has to, when he sings his prayers, has to improvise around that particular mood or mode. That again is the thing that he cannot be taught. It has to be part of him, dating back from his childhood.
Soloist there, Monty Fisher. Earlier we were talking to Emmanuel Fisher and Moshe Korn. There are a few seats left for the London Jewish Males Choir's afternoon concert on Sunday at the Festival Hall. The illustrations, by the way, came from their latest record, which is published by Chapter 1 Records. From the synagogue now to the church of St. George's, Hanover.